Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lydia and I'm a small business owner and an artist. And for the last 8 years, I have been running my business primarily through Etsy. I see on the internet now and then people asking questions like, is it possible to make a living off of an Etsy shop? And I'm living proof that you can. So I thought it'd be fun to share my experience selling on Etsy with you and kind of make a video about the pros and cons of selling on Etsy these days, a little bit about how the platform has changed since I got on in 2016, and if I would recommend opening an Etsy shop in 2024. I think I'll start with pros and cons. So starting with the pros, I think the single biggest advantage to selling on Etsy, especially if you're a brand new shop, is the exposure. Etsy is one of the biggest online markets in the game right now. They're up there with eBay and Amazon in terms of the number of buyers that are coming to their platform every year. And just by opening an Etsy shop, which is almost free to do, you have access to this huge market of potential customers that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. You would need to have a good social media following or a good email list built already, and both of those take time. And even then, you would probably have to spend a lot of money advertising either on social media or just generally across the internet to get your products in front of as many people as are on Etsy. That's just straight out of the gate. The main advantage to being on Etsy is the number of customers that you potentially have. I would compare it to being like a little shop on a country road versus a little shop on a main thoroughfare in a big city. The second pro that I think Etsy offers sellers as well as buyers is trustworthiness. Because they've been around for so many years, a lot of people are really familiar with the platform and they feel comfortable buying from it. I've had 1 or 2 customers in my 8 years of selling who have been skeptical because they were first-time Etsy buyers, but that is not the norm, and people are much more likely to go and spend money on Etsy than they are to go to a site they're not familiar with and put in all their information and risk not receiving an item. The third one is their interface and the avoidance of any setup costs. Etsy has a 20-cent listing fee, and that is the only upfront cost to opening an Etsy shop. Everything else is after the fact of when a buyer makes a purchase and the fees that come out of that, which I'll talk about in a minute. But 20 cents is a very, very low cost to start an Etsy shop. You don't have to pay for hosting or a website. You don't have to pay for someone to design the interface. And it comes with that like nice interface that's really easy to use and very self-explanatory. A big advantage for sellers is that you avoid a lot of bureaucratic headaches. The main area in which I am talking about is sales tax. They handle all sales tax collection and remission for you. If you live in a state where sales tax is collected, I live in Indiana, we have a sales tax here. So when I was setting up my own website, I think in 2019, I had to go register with the state of Indiana to get a sales tax license. What is it called? A sales tax, like a retail certificate. I can never remember what it's called. Basically licensing me to collect sales tax in like the name of Indiana, which I then have to remit at the beginning of every year. And if I don't remit it, there are fees involved for like every day that you're late. I think you're able to do that without forming like a proper business, like an LLC. I think you're able to do it as a sole proprietorship, but I personally could not figure out how to. So when I went to do that in order to collect sales tax and make sales on my own site, I formed an LLC because I literally couldn't figure out how to avoid doing that. So Etsy allowed me to run my business for like 2+ years without having to go through all paperwork, fees, and like ongoing paperwork and fees, because every 2 years you have to renew that license, and I think there's like a $35 fee when you do that. So Etsy cuts out some of that intermediate cost, headaches, and work that come with running a business on your own. They also make international shipping super easy. The EU, like Germany particularly, has instituted a lot of rules about shipping into the EU and into individual countries in the EU. And Etsy, again, smooths out all those bumps, makes it a very easy experience for sellers. So I actually do all of my international shipping to the EU through Etsy because they make it so simple and easy. For other countries like Canada, it's not so difficult, and I don't rely on Etsy as heavily for that. But that's a huge perk of being on Etsy. It has, again, saved me many hours and probably some money in registration fees in order to still be able to ship overseas without having to go through a bunch of registration processes. My favorite, my single most favorite thing that Etsy has done for both sellers and buyers is the creation of Etsy's Purchase Protection Program. I can't remember exactly when they rolled this out. It might have been 2023. So in the last year, Etsy has rolled out this program where orders under $250 in value that have a valid tracking number can be fully refunded if something happens to them, if they're lost in shipping or if they are damaged in shipping. And this is just so helpful when you're running a product-based business. It's not super often that things get damaged, but it happens from time to time. Sometimes once a week, something will arrive damaged, sometimes more. Sometimes it just feels like it's raining damaged packages and upset customers. And for a long time, I just had a replacement policy where I would just resend the items, because that way I would at least break even on the order instead of having to refund a customer for something that I'd already sent them. But I would take a little hit from that. And sometimes, especially if shipping was expensive, it would be a big hit. It used to be that the post office was really great about providing refunds. I started shipping a lot in 2020. So in the thick of COVID, they would just send you a check if you submitted a tracking number and photos to prove that the item you sent had been damaged by them. After COVID died down, they cracked down and they were no longer offering that. They'll still offer refunds for undelivered items. So if the tracking number shows that it clearly did not arrive at the destination, they'll send a check. But they instituted these really complicated rules for how to apply for a refund. It wasn't even guaranteed. And one time I even had the post office take my package and never return it. And I was never refunded. I was never reimbursed for the damages. And after that experience, I was like, okay, I'm never bothering with that again. I'm just gonna eat the cost. So Etsy offering this program has been so nice. It's really kind of eased up on the expenses of damaged packages for me. The downside to this, and I'm really happy that they're doing this because they have raised their fees, added fees in new places since I've gotten on there. And this is, I think, a reasonable trade-off for higher fees. It seems very reasonable for them to raise their fees and then offer such a great feature to their sellers. So this has made me feel much less upset about the fees going up because it's really makes a difference. Let's chat about advertising. So there's two forms of advertising you can do on Etsy. You can advertise on Etsy, or you can sign up for offsite ads and advertise it off of Etsy. With on-site ads, seller funded, you set a budget per day and then Etsy will charge you according to whatever ad spend was generated. I currently advertise with $15 a day and I get a 200% return on investment generally. That's also in the same ballpark as when I have done Google advertising for my own website apart from Etsy. I feel like that's fairly normal for a small advertiser like me. Especially with Google ads, you're competing in a huge space and they'll actually show you a little graph of where you're measuring up compared to Walmart, Etsy, eBay, Amazon. And I'm always near the bottom because I'm a really small seller and I don't have much advertising power and I don't have much advertising budget. The other kind of Etsy ads are offsite ads. So this is Etsy advertising your shop and your products on Google outside of Etsy. So the on-site ads are ads that will pop up in search results on Etsy. If you go onto Etsy and you search recipe binder, one of my ads might pop up or an ad from another shop might pop up, and then the rest are ranked by SEO and search results, popularity, and also now by shipping costs, which I'll get to in a minute. So if I spend $15 a day, I will make $45 in sales from that $15, which doesn't sound like a ton. There's a trade-off of if you spend money on advertising, you're going to make sales you wouldn't otherwise, but you're going to make less money from them. Whereas if you don't advertise, you'll keep all that extra money, but you'll make fewer sales generally. So it's just kind of a toss-up that you have to make a decision on when you're an online seller? Do I want to pay for advertising, or do I just want to be content with the orders I'm going to get from SEO and other people just searching for my products? I didn't do any advertising for the first couple of years of my business because my revenue was pretty low and I didn't feel like I had the wiggle room to spend money on it. I have heard, and I kind of have experienced this just experimenting with different amounts of advertising. If you want to advertise your stuff on Etsy, I would set a budget of about $15 a day, because anything less than is not going to go very far. So you want to invest enough upfront to see some return on your investment. And then the offsite ads are Google ads that are being promoted places across the internet, websites, social media, YouTube, places like that. When offsite ads, the Google ads sponsored by Etsy, were rolled out in 2020, I was mandatorily opted in because I had made more than $10,000 the year before in my shop. And I was pretty mad about this, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I did not want to be forced into doing something. And offsite ads has actually turned out to be a good thing. The return on investment is much better because they cap the cost at 12%. If you're a smaller shop and you're not mandatorily opted in, you have the option to opt in, but you will be charged 15%, so it's slightly higher. But that's still about half the cost of what it costs me to do my own advertising. So this has turned out to be a good thing, whether or not I like that I have to do it. Based on that, I would consider advertising kind of neither to be a pro nor a con. The pro is that it actually works. The con is that I have to do it whether I want to or not. Now that we've covered the pros and kind of the neutral things, let's talk about some of the downsides, the cons to selling on Etsy in 2024. First and foremost, of course, is the fees. Etsy has a 6.5% seller fee, and you might say, well, that's not terrible, but it's actually not the only fee. There are some costs that are kind of not hidden costs, but I feel like on the surface 6.5% sounds great, and then when you get into it, it's actually a lot more than that. When I got on Etsy in 2016, the fee was 3.5%. So since I got on, the fee itself has effectively almost doubled. They also had the 20-cent listing fee back then. That stayed the same. 20 cents is not a lot unless you're selling small items, in which case you'll want to account for that 20 cents because that can actually make a big difference if you're selling an item that's like $3, $5, or even like $8. 3.5% went to 5%, and when it went to 5%, they started charging 5% on what you're charging your customers for shipping too. And I really disliked that because I personally have striven to keep my shipping prices kind of low, or at least reasonable, and certainly haven't been charging more than what it costs me across the board. So when Etsy started charging 5% on their shipping fees, I had to raise my shipping prices by 5% in order to offset that cost, which didn't help me offer cheaper shipping to my Etsy customers. And I know they justified it by saying that, well, some people raised their shipping prices through the roof and they're saving on fees because of that. But I think I can speak for the majority of Etsy sellers when I'd say we weren't doing that. We didn't want to do that. It wasn't really feasible, and this was not a great thing for us as Etsy sellers. In 2022, the fees raised again to 6.5%, and I think that also extends to shipping costs. Keep in mind that shipping costs are constantly rising, and I'll get to this more in a minute because this is like the main con of being on Etsy right now, in my opinion. It just has to do with shipping. Fee that was not talked about when I was getting on Etsy in 2016 was the credit card processing fee. This is a 3% fee, and at some point, I don't even know when, but now it's 3% plus 25 cents per transaction processing fee for credit cards. This is kind of standard online. It's actually the only fee involved in platforms like Shopify, so it's kind of inescapable, but it wasn't actually mentioned up front when I was on Etsy. So a little bit after I opened my Etsy shop, they changed the formatting of their statements so that you could see line item charges. And that's when I realized that 3% of my earnings was also going to Etsy and then to the credit card companies. So that makes your fees effectively 9.5%. And then depending on the price of your item with the 25-cent fee and the 20-cent fee, that could be 10% or more. On a more expensive item, those 2 extra charges might not have as much of an impact, but on a small item, they definitely can. And then you have to add on top of that advertising charges if you're mandatorily opted in. At a glance, I honestly wasn't sure exactly how many orders I'm making per month with the offsite ads. I am spending less than I am on my own ads. But I think averaged across all of my orders, it comes out to about $1 per order. So there is that extra 12% on some orders. So for your orders, you're effectively paying 10% up to 22%, depending on the sale and depending on whether there are any advertising charges. Again, it doesn't sound like a ton, but especially when you get that advertising fee on top of it, it really adds up. Last year, I paid enough to Etsy in fees and advertising charges to pay for a brick and mortar location. If I weren't paying that money to them, I could put that money into a storefront. And maybe that's just the trade-off of selling online versus selling on your own. But if I were making those sales through my own website, I would be saving thousands upon thousands of dollars. And so if you're looking into starting on Etsy, I would encourage you, if you think your business has any potential to grow into a full-time job and a full-time salaried position for you where you're making a living off of it, I would really encourage you to work on building a platform outside of Etsy from the beginning, because it's going to make a big difference down the road. That 10% seems like a small thing to start out with, but when it compounds on order after order after order and you're making thousands of orders a year, it is a big amount of money. And I would encourage you to keep that in mind. Another downside to Etsy is that you don't own your customer base. So you can't take your customers and opt them into your own email marketing, for instance. You'll have a list of thousands of names and you have their emails, but you are not allowed to do that because technically they belong to Etsy. Etsy owns those emails. People have opted into Etsy's marketing, but not into your marketing. And you might be like, well, that's a small thing. But if you're trying to build a following, whether that's on social media or on an email list, which are both pretty effective, especially the email list. The email list is the most effective I've found. You're missing out on a huge potential customer base, and that's definitely a downside to selling on Etsy. Another one of the huge downsides to selling on Etsy is that other people are advertising and your competition is showing up in your shop. They are showing up on your listings. If you go to any listing on an Etsy shop and you scroll down, there will be suggestions for similar items. And those items are more often than not from the shop's direct competition. But another way that this has a negative effect on my shop is that on Etsy, people come into my shop and they buy one thing, or they buy a bundle. I really recommend selling bundles on Etsy because it helps with raising the order value on a single purchase. But when people are shopping on my site, they're in an illustrated life bubble. They're surrounded by my products. They're not getting ads from anyone else's shop, any other creators or artists. And what happens is on my website, I get many higher value orders. So people will just order a binder and tabs or a binder in my shop. When they shop on my site, they order a binder or 2 binders and a set of tabs and some filler pages. And maybe they'll order a binder, tabs, and some filler, and then they'll add a greeting card and some wrapping paper and art print and some stationery. And then I have an order that's valued well over $100, sometimes $200. High value orders are much, much more frequent on my own website than they are on Etsy because people are taking the time to browse through all of my items. And on Etsy, their attention is split between my shop and this shop and that shop. And so that's a huge disadvantage to being on Etsy that I feel like no one talks about. Last but not least, we have the final con, certainly not the least of all of them. And honestly, the thing that got me to make this video because I wanted to talk about it and discuss it, it's shipping. Etsy has been pushing sellers to offer lower shipping for quite a while. They've been threatening to demote listings that have too expensive shipping. Etsy does offer fairly low cost shipping, and they now offer it through USPS, UPS, and FedEx, which they didn't offer UPS for a long time. In spite of all of the rising costs, Etsy has really been pushing for shops to offer cheaper shipping or even free shipping. A few years ago, they added a program where shops that offered free shipping on orders of $35 or more got promoted. And that was just not an option for me. My best-selling item is a $35 binder. I didn't want to raise the price of it, and I would lose a ton of money if I offered free shipping. And I also didn't want to lower the price by $1 and then force people to add on extra things, because that wouldn't offset the cost of shipping. So I just had to put up with not being promoted, essentially. Very frustrating for someone who's trying to help their business succeed. And then very recently, I got a notification warning me that on October 1st, 2024, Etsy was going to start actively demoting listings that offered shipping that was just too expensive based on their standards. The solution they suggest is to just raise the price of the item to offset lower shipping costs. I have held out on doing that for so long because I didn't want to try to fool my customers into buying an item because it has cheaper shipping. As an online shopper, a frequent online shopper, I can understand the appeal of free shipping and of discounts. Like, I love a discount as much as anyone, but I do feel like Etsy maybe misunderstands their customer base a little bit. Or at least they misunderstand my customer base. I'm one of millions of shops on Etsy, so this is very subjective. I've actually raised my shipping prices in the last 2 years by about $2 on my best-selling item, which is a binder. And it's gone from $6.50 to $8.50. That's like median cost for me to ship from Indiana to anywhere from Massachusetts to Florida, Texas to California, and those are like 4 of my biggest markets. It can range anywhere from $6 to $12 depending on the location. $8.50 is a very like median price. In spite of me raising my shipping prices by $2 because I just couldn't offer $6 shipping anymore, my sales have not gone down. People have not complained, and they've still been buying binders at the same rate. The feedback I've received on product costs and shipping costs are actually kind of even. The number of people that complain about product costs might even be higher. I think that Etsy shoppers are coming to the platform looking for handmade, unique goods, and I think a lot of them understand that they are going to have to pay a little bit more for that. But there's always the rogue customer who comes to me and is like, did you know I could get this similar thing from Amazon for $17 and it comes with all of these things? And I'm like, sure. Mine are manufactured domestically. I'm not just like creating them en masse and drop shipping them from China. They're coming from the US, they're made here, they cost more. And that's okay. If you want to go buy the cheap stuff from Amazon, you can do that. I feel like not being an Amazon seller is a big advantage. Just from a social perspective, I think a lot of people are trying to avoid shopping from Amazon and these big corporations, because when they say just absorb that cost of shipping into your products and offer cheaper shipping, I just want to be straightforward with my customers. I don't want to try to fool my customers into making a purchase thinking it's a better deal. And I've kept all of my prices pretty low. I haven't really raised them since I've introduced these items in like 2020. And my costs have gone up, inflation has gone up, the cost of paper has gone up a lot. You know, these items cost me more in general than they did when I started selling them. They're not like forcing or even incentivizing free shipping, they just want cheaper shipping. But after a lot of thought, what I've decided to do, and like this is the change that I am implementing, is to offer shop-wide free shipping. I couldn't figure out how to absorb some product cost into some shipping cost into the product, and then not have the overall cost of an order rise. A binder was $35, now it's $44, and that like hurts me to think about because it seems so much more expensive. And if people buy 2 $44 binders, their order is going to be $88 instead of $70 with an $8 shipping charge. So I've added a 10% discount to multiple items that are purchased in my shop to avoid the increase over and over of those shipping costs being absorbed into the items. I've just done the math, and generally this does work out so that if someone orders a more expensive item, like a binder that has more expensive shipping, the price has been raised like $8 or $9, and then they order a card and the price has doubled from like $3.50 to $7, because that's how much it costs to ship a 3-ounce package. When they order those together and they order a $7 card with a $44 binder, they'll receive a $5 discount that is equivalent to the extra cost of shipping. So I implemented this about a week ago, So far I haven't really seen like a change, a decrease or an increase in orders. So I'm hoping this doesn't have like a negative impact on my shop. I'm not seeing it have like an outsized positive impact either. But just like based on my customer base, I don't think it necessarily would. I ran this idea past my sister and she was like, I actually really like the idea of free shipping. It sounds attractive. And that did encourage me to go forward with it. But it feels like such an astronomical change. And I don't love that I've had to do it. I feel like I've kind of been pushed into it, not having a better option and also not wanting my listings to get demoted. And since I found my niche, a lot of other people have started creating those too. So I have a lot more competition. Yeah, like I don't want my listings to get buried under other people selling similar stuff. And I feel like I need to do something to stay on top of the changes that Etsy is making. But yeah, that's a big con to selling on Etsy is your business is not really your own. You are kind of subject to whatever decisions Etsy makes about the market. And at the end of the day, Etsy itself is a business. They are a big corporation. They're like worth like $2 billion. So honestly, like at the end of the day, I'm working for a big corporation and not for myself. And I think that is one of the biggest cons to being on Etsy. They do a good job of positioning themselves as like a small business platform and not as we're a big corporation. And there's some benefits like the Etsy Purchase Protection Program that come from having a shop that's under the umbrella of a big corporation, but there's also downsides like constantly increasing fees and mandatory advertising, being pressured to offer cheaper shipping. And the crazy thing about the offering cheap shipping thing is that big corporations like Amazon that offer free shipping, we pay for that. Like everybody who has Prime pays like $120 a year for it. So it's not just that they're getting free shipping. They're paying $120 flat rate to get free shipping year round. If Etsy really cares about offering cheap shipping, maybe they should offer a subscription to their buyers like Amazon where they can get cheap shipping. I don't know exactly how that would work out because Amazon has fulfillment centers and Etsy sellers create and ship their own products. But there's a wholesale market called Fair Online that does the same thing. They have a program called Fair Insider where shops get free shipping on orders when they are part of this program. And I sell on Fair and I ship all of my own orders to shops that buy from me through there. So it is possible. So if anyone out there at Etsy is watching this, that's my suggestion to kind of to take the pressure of offering cheap shipping off of your sellers and transfer it to where it really belongs with the buyers. So, in conclusion, is Etsy a good platform to sell on in 2024? Is it a good place to start a shop in 2024? And I would say the answer is yes. There are huge perks to selling on Etsy if you understand the downsides. I think they are pretty evenly balanced with the upsides. Someone new coming into Etsy in 2024 probably won't have the same perspective as me, who came in 2016 and has seen all these changes happen. They'll probably just accept it as the status quo and it probably won't bother them as much. What I would encourage you to do is, if you're just starting a business and you think it has any potential to grow into a full-time job or a large successful business with many customers and yearly revenue in like the 5 or 6 figures, I would encourage you to work on building up a social media presence, an email list, and your own e-commerce website from the start. I wouldn't wait to do that. I know it costs money to pay for an email host, to pay for a website, to pay for a domain, but I think it is a valuable investment in the future of your business because, like I talked about, all those fees. Shopify, which is the platform I use, has a 2.9 or 3.5% fee on all orders, and then a $29 per month subscription fee to use their platform. I use a free website template, and my domain is hosted through GoDaddy, and I think it's like $90 for 2 years. So on the whole, the costs are way lower upfront than the much higher after the fact costs on Etsy. So the trade-off of selling on Etsy is that you might get stuck there because you don't have those extra funds to grow your business in a different direction. You kind of belong to Etsy now, and they kind of have control over your customer base. So yeah, I would really encourage you to look into building your online presence elsewhere, but Etsy is also a great place to start a business. And if you don't care about growing your business into like a big thing, it's just a hobby, yeah, it cuts out a ton of the front end work and a lot of like the bureaucracy of running a business, and can just make it a really like easy process. I'm going to make a video in the next few weeks talking more about my tips for building your business outside of Etsy and just running a business generally. So I hope you'll come around again for that. It'll be kind of like, I guess, a part 2 to this video, but not exactly. I hope you've found this video informative and helpful. If you have any thoughts on the changes I've made or the changes Etsy's making, I'd love to hear about them. Please leave a comment. Let's chat about these changes that Etsy's making and discuss whether they're really good for sellers and buyers or not. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like. And if you've watched a couple of my videos and you enjoy them, please consider subscribing. And I'll see you next time.